My center vent actuators not work. So Mercedes decided that when they developed automatic climate control, that you only needed center air distribution when your climate control system was on max AC or on AC in general. And if you didn't want AC, then for some reason the center vents should not work. And the defrost vents should be open all the time. So here's the reason for that. Most of the time, Mercedes assumed that if you were going to be in a situation where your climate control utterly failed, that you would need, the worst case scenario would be that you'd be driving in winter and you couldn't see out your windshield because of ice. So they designed the cars so where they would default onto heat and to where the electronic climate control system would allow the defrost vents to remain open so that the climate control could at least clear the windshield. Now this is great if you live in Germany, but if you live in Florida, the default mode, it would be really nice if it were AC or center vents, but it's not. Now, over time, the vacuum actuators in these cars start to leak and deteriorate, and then see if I can get this out of here. Probably can't. Oh yeah. And then the little outside ring separates inside the actuator, keeping it from holding vacuum. But even a little tiny pinhole leak, that's right, just a little teeny tiny leak can cause the actuator to not work. So let's talk about how you can deal with actuator problems on 116, 123, 126, and 107 chassis, as well as a little bit about the 124 chassis. Let's start with the 116. First car to have automatic climate control. These cars used a recirculation actuator, a defrost actuator, and a center vent actuator. While if you have small enough hands, which apparently I did 5 or 6 years ago, or 7 years ago, I think this is back in 2013 or 2012, you can actually slip your hand inside the dash, disassemble the recirculation or the center vent actuators, and get, the recirculation or the defrost actuator, and repair them without pulling the dash. But if you need to do the center vent actuator in a 116, you have to pull the whole dashboard out. Now, center vent actuator failure on a 116 is relatively unusual, but it does happen from time to time. So, just letting you guys know. Now, on the 123 series, and this is part of the 123 center vent actuator cone, there are these 3 little legs inside the dash. You could pull the glove box and sneak a vacuum line onto this fitting right here, and actually test your actuator to see if it's leaking or if it's not receiving vacuum at all. But typically in a higher mileage car, it's going to be leaking. Now, a lot of shops will say you have to pull the dash in these cars. That's not necessarily true. Actually, now you can buy a diaphragm from a company called Performance Analysis Company. And you've been able to do this for years, actually. It's not a recent thing, but you can actually just change the diaphragm. If you can get your hand back there, you can cut 1 or 2 of these tabs. What you're trying to do is you're trying to free up this particular part, which can be a little bit hard, but it snaps in place. If you can just cut 1 of these, then typically with your fingers you can get back there and unlock these. Now, it's hard. It's extremely hard, but it's a lot easier than pulling a dashboard. And then if you can pull the center element out, which this is not the one for the 123, but it's sort of like this. It has a long tongue on it. And pull the old actuator off, slip a new one on, put it back in its case, actually back in its case, Then there's a giant spring that goes in here that's a lot like this. And put a little bit of silicone oil or silicone grease around the parameter of the seal. You can actually snap the two together again. You know, you're going to need another one of these, by the way, another barrel. But I think Performance Analysis still sells a tool to pop the pods. And you could actually use the pod popper tool from behind, and that's what I do now, and I just changed the diaphragm. Now, on the 107 series cars, actually the center vent actuator rarely fails because it's deep inside the evaporator case. It's protected from heat and all that other miserable stuff. The downside is if it fails and you want it to work, you've got to pull the dash and the evaporator case out. But 9 times out of 10, the defrost actuator fails. If you pull your steering wheel and pull the instrument cluster sitting to your right, plugged into the evaporator case, you will see what looks like this, the center vent actuator, the defrost actuator. And if it leaks, because it supplies vacuum to the center vent actuator to stop along the way, no vacuum will reach the center vent actuator, and then you'll get this giant mess. So that's what ends up happening. But it's got these 3 little legs on it. In order to get it free, you have to cut the little legs off with a razor blade, save the star washers and the plastic, the rubber washers that hold it in. And you've got to cut these off, you've got to get between the black part of the actuator or the green part of the actuator and the bracket itself. You see how I've cut these off on here really flush. I want it, boom, right against its bracket. You also have to get a Dremel tool and a carbide bit to get the rivet off, because this thing right here is riveted to its air flap, and you've got to Dremel the thing out or cut it out and cut the rivet off. I usually replace it with a screw and a nut. I get it extremely tight, and I use Loctite on the nut because I don't want it going anywhere, but you want it to be firmly attached right here like it's supposed to be. All right, let's see here. What else? On the 126 series cars, the defrost actuator could potentially cause center vent actuator failure because it would result in a vacuum leak, as well as the recirculation actuators, which also go bad. All of these can be accessed behind the glove box, or if you have an airbag car, you can remove the airbag frame and get to them. The one exception is the center vent actuator. To get to that thing, you have to pull the climate control panel at minimum, and you have to pull the carpeting that goes on the right side of the transmission tunnel, and then you have a little plastic bracket that the actuator sits in that's held in place with 5 screws, and you could snap it out. But you could change the diaphragm in it. You actually don't have to do this cutting. You can leave the little end and you can leave the whole thing together, just disassemble it and change the diaphragm. And then, yes, it's extremely complicated. You have to hook the 90-degree tongue on the actuator into the air flap. This might be a subject for another video, but this is just a basic overview so you know what to expect. Last is the 124, and the 124, in order to do any repairs, you have to pull the entire dashboard out. And if any of you want to know any more about replacing vacuum actuators in a 124, please drop me a line via email, and for a small fee, I will go over the whole procedure with you. But 124 is its own special case because so many of the actuators are not available. I've developed a list of actuators that can be used in place of the ones that are not around anymore, and which diaphragms you have to use, etc., etc. So anyway, if you enjoy this video, please like, share, and subscribe. Please tap the bell for notifications. Leave us a thumbs up, and leave us a nice comment if this was helpful. In the meantime, enjoy working on your Mercedes, and don't just, wire all your actuators in place. It's really a pleasure driving a Mercedes with a climate control system that actually works the right way. And this is also the kind of work you have to do it yourself, because most people just don't have the patience to do it. Anyway, thank you so much, and enjoy driving your classic Mercedes.